The crystal chandelier swayed. Just barely. Just enough to cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Valenti family dining room, where 11 place settings remained untouched and one woman lay motionless. Aleandro Valenti sat at the head of the mahogany table, his paralyzed legs stretched beneath it, his hands gripping the wheelchair armrests so hard his knuckles had turned white as bone. His mother, Caterina, lay 3 feet from his chair. Her lips were turning blue. Her breath had stopped coming. But that was not the worst part. His daughter Emma, 6 years old with dark curls and her father's storm grey eyes, lay on the floor beside her grandmother. Her small chest did not rise. Did not fall. The pink had drained from her face like water through a sieve. 12 men in tailored black suits lined the walls of the dining room, their hands resting on weapons that cost more than most people's houses. Their eyes were fixed on their boss. But nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They were waiting for Aleandro to give an order, and Aleandro could not give orders because Aleandro could not stand. Could not kneel. Could not reach his dying child. The men who had watched him sign execution papers for 17 men in a single winter stood frozen like statues carved from ice. Bruno had called the paramedics 5 minutes ago. Traffic on I-5 was a parking lot. The nearest hospital was 12 minutes away. Emma had for minutes, maybe 5, before the damage became permanent. Before the beautiful, defiant little girl who had learned to read at 4 years old and who collected colors in a box because she said sad days needed their own palette would stop being his daughter and start being a shell wearing her face. Aleandro's hands gripped the armrests harder. They were the same hands that had ordered men into graves. They were strong hands. Powerful hands. Useless hands. Then the kitchen door swung open. A woman in a plain black server's uniform stumbled through, her sleeves dusted with flour from the restaurant kitchen downstairs. She could not have weighed more than 120 pounds. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun. There was a smudge of what looked like chocolate on her collarbone. For a split second, no one in the room recognized the cosmic shift that had just occurred. Aria Morgan did not see 12 men in black. She did not see the most dangerous family in the Pacific Northwest frozen in their own tragedy. She saw a child who was not breathing. She dropped to her knees beside Emma before Sal could move to stop her. Before Bruno could raise his hand. Before the room could register that a nobody, a woman who made $8 an hour and ate the scraps from other people's plates, was touching the boss's daughter without permission. Her hands moved with terrifying precision. She tilted Emma's chin back, checked the airway, positioned her palms on the child's sternum. The compressions came hard and fast, mechanical, like she had done this 1,000 times. 28. 29. 30. Her voice counting aloud was the only sound in the room besides the rhythm of her hands. Come on, sweetheart. Come on. She breathed into Emma's mouth. Once. Twice. The child's tiny chest did not respond. Aria did not hesitate. She kept going. Compressions again. Count. Breathe. Count. The flour on her sleeves mixed with sweat and desperation. Her lips were trembling but her hands were steady as iron. Emma's body jerked. The child gasped. Her eyes flew open. Her back arched as her lungs suddenly remembered how to pull in air, and she coughed, sputtered, and began to cry, the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard, because it meant she was alive, she was conscious, she was going to be okay. Aria collapsed backward onto the marble floor, her entire body shaking. She was breathing hard, her hands still trembling, her eyes fixed on the little girl who was now whimpering and reaching for her grandmother. When she finally looked up, she found Aleandro Valenti staring at her with an expression that made the entire room seem to stop existing. Nobody had ever seen that look on his face before. Not in 15 years. Not once. In his eyes was something that looked almost like a breaking. Like a man watching the impossible happen and feeling, for the first time in longer than he could measure, that maybe his broken body was not the end of everything. That maybe there were still ways to matter that had nothing to do with power or money or the fear his name could inspire. The paramedics arrived 4 minutes later. They took Katerina and Emma to Harborview Medical Center, where the doctors would tell Aleandro that his daughter's quick intervention had prevented brain damage, that the compression technique had been textbook perfect, that the child would have no lasting complications. But what Aria Morgan did not know was that 3 months before this moment, on a night when the October wind tore through the empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice, she had stumbled into Aleandro Valenti's black convoy half dead and bleeding, and he had been watching her ever since. What she did not know was that tonight would change everything. If you are still watching, thank you. This story is about to take a turn that will break your heart. Before we continue, please drop a like if this one has already hit you different. Share it with someone who needs to know that invisible people can save the world. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. And now, let us go back to the beginning, to 3 months earlier, to the night Aria Morgan had exactly $5 in her pocket and 7 days to save her sister's life. The night shift at Evergreen Care Home ended at 6 in the morning, but Aria did not leave until the day staff arrived and signed off on every patient on the 3rd floor. The old woman in room 307 needed her sheets changed twice. The man in room 312 had called for her 3 times asking for water he could not hold steady enough to drink himself. The teenager in room 309 was screaming again, the same nightmare, the same terror, but his parents had stopped visiting 3 months ago. She cleaned what she could. She held what needed holding. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus headed west. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and the specific kind of loneliness that came from working in a place where people came to end. Aria grabbed the leftover sandwich from the staff lunch table, turkey and mustard, 3 bites missing, and the apple someone had abandoned near the sink. She wrapped them in napkins and put them in her jacket pocket. Her stomach had stopped complaining about this arrangement months ago. Evergreen Care Home paid $7.50 an hour. The double shifts paid for a studio apartment in a neighborhood where the landlord did not ask questions and the heat worked on Thursdays only. The tips paid for food. The tips paid for medicine. The tips paid for the one thing that mattered more than her own survival. Her sister Emma's surgery was scheduled for November 15th. The bill was $47,000. The insurance company had rejected the claim twice. Emma was only 22 years old, but the doctors said her heart could not take another winter without intervention. The rejection letters sat on the kitchen table like death sentences, written in the language of bureaucracy and procedure codes. Aria counted her tips 3 times that morning. $5.18. The total in her bank account was $187.43. She had 72 days until Emma's surgery, and she was short by $46,812.57. The math was always the same. The numbers never changed. The situation never improved. She caught the bus at 6:45, watching the sun paint the Seattle sky in shades of gray and reluctant orange. The bus smelled like wet fabric and someone else's desperation. A man across the aisle stared at nothing. A woman 2 seats up was talking to herself about something that had happened in 1994. Aria looked out the window and tried not to think about what it felt like to be 26 years old and completely powerless. The parking lot of Pike Place Market was already filling with tourists when she arrived. Aria clocked in at her second job, the restaurant downstairs, under the lights and the noise and the endless tide of people who wanted to be served by someone who smiled like she had something to smile about. That was where she met Marco Bernadetti. He was standing near the kitchen bars, wearing a suit that cost more than 3 months of her rent, his dark eyes moving across the restaurant like he was counting bodies. There was a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, and when he looked at her, something in his expression shifted into something that looked almost like recognition. "You," he said. His voice sounded like gravel. "You are the new girl." Aria nodded. She had learned that nodding was safer than speaking. "What is your name?" "Aria Morgan." "Aria Morgan." He repeated it like he was memorizing it. Like her name mattered. "You work the double shifts. You take the bus. You do not eat the food we give the staff." She did not ask how he knew these things. Men like him always knew. They were always watching. They were always paying attention. "I like the way you move," he said. "Like you are used to solving problems that have no solutions." The dinner rush came at 6:30, and the man in the suit disappeared. Aria thought nothing of it. She had learned not to think about strange men and their strange observations. She had learned not to notice things that did not directly impact her immediate survival. But at 9:15, when she was clearing a table near the window, she saw 3 black SUVs pull up to the curb outside. The doors opened. Men emerged wearing suits that matched the scars they carried. They moved with the synchronized precision of an armed unit securing a perimeter. The restaurant went quiet. Not because of anything anyone said, but because the temperature had changed. The air had become heavier. Everyone could feel that something different had entered the room. The man with the scar on his face was back. He was walking toward the private dining room in the back, and he was carrying a folder the color of old blood. Aria returned to her station and kept moving. She had learned this too. When powerful men gathered, invisible women stayed invisible. That was how they stayed safe. That was how they survived. But what she could not have known was that in the private dining room, a man in a wheelchair was looking at photographs of her face, and asking questions about her life that nobody should have been asking, and making decisions that would reshape both of their futures in ways that neither of them could have predicted. The October rain started at midnight. It came down like a curse, cold and punishing, and by the time Aria finished her shift at 2 in the morning and walked to the parking lot where her 2008 Honda Civic was waiting, the sky had become something that looked like the end of the world. She drove toward home. The streets were nearly empty. The traffic lights turned from red to green to red again, watching over nothing. That was when her car began to make a sound that meant bad news. A grinding noise. A metallic shriek. The engine sputtering and dying right there on the highway overpass, the kind of place where nobody stopped to help and nobody asked questions about who was left behind. The October wind cut through the parking lot like a blade wrapped in ice. Aria Morgan pushed open the side door of Evergreen Care Home at 11:47 in the evening, and the cold hit her chest so hard she had to stop and breathe. Dead leaves skittered across the asphalt in patterns that looked almost deliberate, as if something invisible was moving them around. She pulled her coat tighter. The coat was thin. It had been thin for 3 years. Her shift had ended. 14 hours of it. 2 double shifts back to back, which meant she had moved through the hallways of that place like a ghost, quiet and efficient, changing bedpans and refilling water cups and listening to people talk about their children who never called. Mrs. Patterson had left half a turkey sandwich on her dinner tray again. Aria had wrapped it in a napkin and placed it in her pocket. That would be lunch tomorrow. That would be lunch and dinner if she was careful. She walked across the parking lot toward her car. A 2008 Honda Civic. Blue, but the blue had faded in patches so it looked like the car itself was dying of some slow disease. She had paid $1,700 for it 5 years ago. Every month it cost her something else. A new battery. A transmission fluid flush. New brake pads. New tires. Every repair felt like punishment. Her phone was in her pocket. She could feel it vibrating. She did not look at it until she was at the car door, keys in hand. 17 missed calls. All from Seattle Memorial Hospital. The display showed 1 text from an unknown number, just a phone number and 2 words, "Call back." She knew what the calls were about before she opened the message. Emma. Her sister. 22 years old but looking like someone who had already lived 2 lives and lost both of them. Leukemia. The kind of diagnosis that came with a price tag that made the world stop making sense. $125,000. That was the number they had given her in June when Emma's white blood cell count had started climbing toward a number that meant death was no longer theoretical. $125,000. Aria had $2,437 in her savings account. She had already borrowed $6,000 from her uncle, which meant her uncle no longer looked at her the same way. She had taken a second job. Then a third job on weekends. Then a third job had become a third shift. 14 hours a day. Every single day. And still the number remained impossibly large, like something written in a language she could not read. She was about to get in the car when she heard footsteps. Not the footsteps of someone walking. The footsteps of someone approaching with intention. She turned and saw him. Douglas Hale. 48 years old, expensive cologne that smelled like artificial flowers left too long in a closed room, a smile that never reached his eyes. He worked for the financing company that had approved Emma's hospital treatment. Aria had met him twice before. Once when he had come to Evergreen Care Home to discuss a billing question about her mother's past care. Once when he had called her about a late payment on her sister's account. This was the third time. Aria. He said her name like he was tasting it. I was hoping I would see you before you left. She did not answer. Something in her body had already begun preparing for trouble. Her hands were cold. Her breath had become shallow. He moved closer. Not so close that anyone watching from the building would have noticed anything unusual. But close enough that she could feel the shape of him, the weight of him, the fact that the parking lot was empty and the building was 20 yards behind her and the nearest person with a phone was already asleep. Your sister's bills are now 9 months overdue, he said. His voice was calm. Almost friendly. That was the thing about truly dangerous people. They did not need to raise their voices. The hospital is prepared to pursue legal action. Your mother's estate is already claimed. Your personal assets are minimal. So I am here to discuss a solution. I have been making payments, Aria said. Her voice sounded very small. Minimal payments, he corrected. Payments that mean my company loses money every single month. Payments that suggest you do not understand the seriousness of your situation. He reached up and touched her face. Just the back of his hand, a casual brush against her cheekbone. But his hand was cold, and the touch was not casual at all. Emma is at St. Mary's in room 317, correct? She shares the room with another patient. A woman recovering from abdominal surgery. They talk sometimes. She seems very attached to Emma. Emma is very attached to her too. Aria's entire body went rigid. The financing company has connections, he continued, his voice still calm, still friendly. We work with many hospitals. Many clinics. We have relationships with agencies that provide other services. Services related to immigration. Services related to relocation. Aria, what I am telling you is that your sister is very isolated right now. Very vulnerable. And my company knows people who specialize in finding vulnerable young women. His hand moved from her face to her throat. Not squeezing. Just resting there. A statement of fact written in pressure and flesh. 7 days, he said. $125,000. Cash. Delivered to an address I will send you. If the money arrives, your sister remains in the hospital bed, continues her treatment, and nobody ever hears from my company again. If the money does not arrive, then Emma disappears into a network that you cannot reach, cannot save, and cannot find. Do you understand what I am telling you? She tried to speak. Her throat was too tight. Do you understand? She nodded. Just barely. His hand was still there. The smell of his cologne was overwhelming. Good, he said, and he smiled, and then he pulled his hand away and stepped back. 7 days, Aria. Starting now. He walked away across the parking lot. He did not hurry. He walked like a man who had said what he needed to say and was confident it would be obeyed. His footsteps echoed off the asphalt, measured and unhurried, until he reached a silver Mercedes in the far corner and drove away without looking back. Aria's hand was shaking so badly she could not get the car key into the lock. She tried 3 times. On the 4th try, her fingernails scraped concrete and she nearly fell. She caught herself against the car door. Her breathing was coming in short, sharp gasps that felt like they belonged to someone else's body. She sat in the driver's seat for 11 minutes without starting the engine. Just sat there in the dark, her hands on the steering wheel, her eyes open but seeing nothing. When she finally turned the key, the engine caught and settled into its normal rhythm. A rhythm that meant the car might last another month. Or might not. That was the way everything worked now. Nothing was guaranteed. Everything was temporary. She drove onto Highway 90 heading east. It was a drive she had made 1,000 times. Home was a studio apartment in Shoreline, a place where the walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors' arguments through the plaster. It cost her $840 a month, which meant it cost her $300 more than she could actually afford, which meant she was always behind on rent, which meant her landlord was always threatening eviction. The highway was mostly empty. Seattle at midnight looked like a city trying very hard to sleep and not quite managing it. The streetlights cast everything in a sick orange glow. Her breath was fogging the windows. Her phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then again. Text messages arriving like a countdown. One from her uncle asking if she could pay back the $6,000 by the end of the month. One from the hospital asking for an update on her sister's account. One from an unknown number that just said, "Thinking of you. Prayers for your strength." She did not know who sent the last one. The engine made a sound at mile marker 47. Not a big sound. Just a grinding noise, metallic and wrong, the sound of something mechanical dying by inches. Then it made the sound again. Then again. Aria's hands tightened on the wheel. The engine began to sputter. The dashboard lights flickered. The power steering became heavy all at once, like the car was giving up on the pretense of working properly. She managed to coast toward the shoulder, pulling hard on the wheel, her arms burning with the effort of keeping the vehicle moving forward. The engine died completely. Complete silence except for the wind and the occasional car passing in the distance, moving at speed, not slowing, not stopping, just continuing on toward somewhere that was not here. She tried to turn the key again. The engine made a grinding sound and then nothing. Again. Nothing. She sat in the darkness of her car with the windows fogging and the November wind starting to rattle the frame, and she understood that the car was finished. Not temporarily broken. Finished. Done. Like everything else in her life, it had reached its expiration date. She opened the glove compartment and found her grandmother's recipe book. It was leather-bound, the leather cracked and soft from decades of use. Her grandmother had written recipes in it. Pasta dough. Braised rabbit. Risotto with saffron. And in the margins, in faded ink, she had written notes that were no longer about cooking. They were about survival. They were about a woman who had lost everything once and had to rebuild from nothing. Aria picked up the book and opened it at random. One page showed a recipe for minestrone soup with handwritten notes beside it. "This is what I made when your grandfather was sick. This is what kept us alive when there was nothing else." She wrote those words in 1987. Aria's hands were shaking again. She got out of the car. The wind was worse outside. It was a dry October wind, the kind that cut through fabric like the wind itself had been sharpened. She started walking along the highway shoulder, the recipe book held against her chest. Her coat was too thin. Her shoes were falling apart at the heel. Every step was a negotiation with cold and pain and the understanding that nobody was coming to help her. She had been walking for approximately 12 minutes when she saw the headlights. Not one vehicle. Multiple vehicles. 5 of them, moving in perfect formation down the highway, black and sleek and moving with the kind of synchronized precision that suggested they were not moving randomly or casually or without intention. The lead vehicle slowed. Then stopped. A man emerged from the passenger side. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone like a punishment written in white tissue. His name was Bruno. He worked for a man named Aleandro Valenti. He had worked for that man for 15 years. He looked at the woman standing on the highway shoulder in a coat that was falling apart, holding a book against her chest like it was the last thing in the world that mattered. "Get in the car," he said. It was not a suggestion. The leather seats in the black SUV were soft, expensive, the kind of texture that belonged to another world entirely. Aria sat in the back row, shaking violently, the recipe book still pressed against her ribs like a shield. Bruno drove in absolute silence. The only sound was the engine humming beneath them, a low growl that seemed to echo inside her chest. 20 minutes passed without a word. The man with the scar sat across from her in the middle row. Aleandro Valenti. Even sitting in a wheelchair in the back of a moving vehicle, he commanded the space around him like he owned the air itself. His suit was charcoal grey, tailored so precisely that the seams looked like geometry. A gold watch caught the highway lights on his wrist. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they did not look away from her face. "What is your name?" His voice was like thunder rumbling in the distance. "Aria." The word came out fractured, barely a whisper. "Aria Morgan. Who did this to you?" She did not answer. Could not. The bruises on her neck were still fresh enough that breathing hurt. Aleandro made a single phone call. He did not raise his voice. He simply said, "Seattle Memorial Hospital. Check the cystic fibrosis wing. Find Emma Morgan, age 11. I want her surgery moved to the front of the list. Today. Fund it completely. Make it anonymous. Foundation grant." He paused. "Because I said so." He ended the call. Aria's hands were shaking worse now, but for a different reason. "Why would you?" "You will not ask questions tonight," Aleandro said quietly. "You will rest. Tomorrow, we talk." The SUV pulled into a private entrance at Valenti Medical Center. Bruno carried her inside. She did not remember the transition from car to hallway, only the sensation of being lifted, the smell of his cologne mixing with antiseptic, the feel of marble floors beneath them even though her feet never touched the ground. She woke in a private room. Sunlight was pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A doctor was examining her ribs, his hands gentle but his face nervous, as if he was afraid of something. He was. 3 cracked ribs, he said quietly. Facial contusions. Defensive wounds on both forearms. No pneumothorax, which is fortunate. He applied tape across her ribs with practiced efficiency. "You were very lucky." Luck had nothing to do with it. A man named Sal brought her fresh clothes at noon. Not her own clothes. New ones. Jeans that fit, a soft grey sweater, underwear still in packages. He also brought her grandmother's recipe book, cleaned of gravel dust, the pages dry now, the margin still filled with careful handwriting. "Why?" Aria asked him. Sal just shook his head and left without answering. 2 weeks later, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was professional, apologetic, offering her a position at Marcello's, the upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Seattle where she had applied 6 months ago and never heard back from. They had an opening for an experienced server. Salary, $3,200 monthly, plus tips. They needed her to start immediately. She said yes before they finished the sentence. What she did not see, Aleandro Valenti owned Marcello's through 3 separate shell companies, and Bruno had personally visited the restaurant manager at his home, sitting across from him at his kitchen table, explaining with surgical precision that if anyone at all, treated the new server named Aria Morgan with anything less than absolute respect, they would answer to the boss himself. The manager had not slept well that night. Her first shift was a Friday. The kitchen smelled like garlic and basil and the kind of heat that comes from properly trained hands. Aria moved through the service with muscle memory from her years at Evergreen Care Home, but everything was different here. The plates were heavier. The food was more expensive. The other servers kept their distance from her like she was marked. She did not understand why until the 3rd week. Every Thursday night at 11 o'clock, a black town car idled outside Marcello's back in trance. Bruno sat in the driver's seat, engine running, tinted windows up. He never came inside. He just waited until Aria emerged, walked to her car, and drove away. Then Bruno followed her home. 3 months passed this way. Small gestures. Untraceable protection. Not a word exchanged between them. But what Aria did not know was that Victoria Ashford had already begun her work. Photos appeared on Seattle society blogs, Aria leaving the restaurant under Bruno's protection, a man's hand on her elbow, the caption crude and specific, Aleandro Valenti's new acquisition. How long until he trades her in like the others? Then, she was nobody before. Now she's a kept woman. How much do you think that costs? The rumors spread like poison in water. On a Thursday in mid-January, Marcello's received a catering request for the Valenti estate in Medina. The job required 2 servers and a kitchen assistant. The manager assigned Aria without hesitation. She did not know why until she arrived and saw the house. It was sprawling, built into a hillside overlooking Lake Washington, the kind of property that required a security code just to enter the driveway. Staff members moved through the marble foyer like they were in a cathedral. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Oil paintings of dead men with Aleandro's eyes stared down from the walls. The dining room table seated 24. Aleandro sat at the head in his wheelchair, dressed in black, a silver chain visible at his throat. His daughter Emma, age 6, sat to his left, coloring in a book with concentration, her tongue between her teeth. His mother Francesca sat to his right, resplendent in emerald silk, her silver hair swept into an elaborate knot. Aria stayed in the kitchen, plating courses, moving trays through the swinging doors, keeping her head down. She did not allow herself to look at him. The crash came during the main course. Francesca reached for her wine glass. Her hand trembled. The glass fell and shattered against the marble table, red wine spreading like blood. Then her body went rigid. She slumped sideways, her head striking the table edge, and she did not move again. At the same moment, Emma coughed. Then coughed again. Her small face went purple. Her hands clawed at her throat. She could not breathe. She was choking, her body seized, her eyes bulging with terror. The dining room went absolutely silent. 12 soldiers in black suits stood frozen. Even Bruno, standing against the back wall, did not move. They waited for orders that Aleandro Valenti could not give because his legs would not work and his wheelchair would not allow him to reach across a table and save his child's life. Aria heard the sound first. Not the choking. The silence underneath it. The terrible silence of men trained to kill, rendered completely useless. She moved without thinking. She crossed 15 feet in seconds, swept Emma into her arms, positioned her small body against her chest, and performed the Heimlich with the precision she had learned in her caretaker certification. Once. Twice. The bread dislodged from Emma's throat and flew across the room. Emma gasped. Sobbed. Breathed. Then Aria dropped to her knees beside Francesca, checked for a pulse, steady, strong, elevated her legs on a chair, and began giving orders like she owned the room. Call the ambulance now. Sal, get me water and a cool cloth. Someone find me a pillow. Move. They moved. She held Francesca's hand and whispered that help was coming, that she would be fine, that she was safe. Her voice was steady like a blade, like a prayer, like something that could cut through darkness and make it stop. Aleandro watched this woman, this nobody, this served waitress in a black uniform, command his armed soldiers like they were children. Command them and have them obey instantly. Something in his chest cracked open, a sound like breaking ice. The ambulance arrived. Francesca was stable, a minor stroke, the paramedic said, but she would recover. She would be fine. At 1:47 in the morning, Aria sat alone in Marcello's kitchen eating leftover carbonara straight from the pan. Her hands were still shaking. The kitchen was dark except for the under-cabinet lights, the checkered floor gleaming like water. The wheelchair made a soft sound as it rolled through the swinging doors. Aleandro Valenti came to a stop 3 feet from her. He did not speak for a long moment. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. "You did not freeze," he said finally. His voice was different now. Lower. Like something had been removed from it. Aria set down her fork. "I'm a caretaker. It's what I do. My men freeze because they fear me. You did not freeze because you do not." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. The scar running from his eye to his cheekbone. The power in his shoulders even while seated. The devastation behind his eyes. "Why did you help me?" she asked. 3 months ago. On that highway. Why? Aleandro's jaw tightened. "Because when Bruno pulled you into that SUV, bleeding and half dead, you looked at me with the same expression I saw in the mirror the night I ordered my own brother killed. You refused to break." Aria set down the pan. The words poured out of her: Emma's illness, the $47,000 in remaining debt, her parents dead 8 years, double shifts at Evergreen, leftover meal trays, for hours of sleep, $125,000 demanded by a man named Douglas Hale, her sister's name also Emma, the coincidence of that, the impossibility of the numbers. Aleandro listened without interrupting. Then he made a call. Just one. Transfer Emma Morgan's entire file to Valenti Medical Center. Full scholarship. Medical transplant fund. Everything covered. Effective immediately. The line went silent. "You heard me," he said, and ended the call. Aria's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. What she did not know, Douglas Hale had been watching Marcello's for 3 weeks, and the photographs Victoria Ashford had leaked to every society blog in Seattle were already spreading like a virus. By morning, the director of Evergreen Care Home would call her into his office with pale hands and a printed stack of blog posts. By afternoon, she would be fired. By evening, she would have $1,400 in savings and rent due in 8 days. But at this moment, in the kitchen at 1:47 in the morning, with a man who had just changed her entire life sitting across from her in the dark, Aria Morgan did not yet know that the worst was still coming. She simply sat there and let herself believe that maybe, for once, someone was going to stay. The bridge air cuts like a blade wrapped in ice. 200 feet below, the ship canal churns black and invisible, and Aria Morgan stands with both hands gripping wet metal railing, her breath visible in clouds that dissolve into nothing. 3:47 in the morning. The Aurora Bridge at its coldest, its emptiest, its most honest. Her phone screen glows in her trembling hands. -$47. The overdraft symbol blinking like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. Emma's medication refill was denied 6 hours ago. The pharmacy would not discuss it over the phone, and Aria cannot afford the copay anyway, not now, not anymore. Mrs. Callahan stopped returning her calls after the 4th message. Victoria Ashford's smear campaign spread to 3 more employers yesterday. All 3 rescinded their job offers before she could even accept them. All 3 sent form letters apologizing for the misunderstanding. Douglas Hale sent a text at midnight. Just one word: 12. 12 hours. She stands on the bridge because standing is what people do before they stop standing. The October cold bites through her coat, the one she bought 4 years ago at a thrift store for $8, and every fiber in her shakes. Not from temperature. From the weight of 8 years carrying everything alone. Her parents did. Emma depending on her. Double shifts at Evergreen that led nowhere. Leftover meal trays eaten alone in her car. For hours of sleep on nights when sleep came at all. Maybe Hale is right. Maybe this is the only way the numbers make sense. Maybe some people are not meant to survive. She lifts one foot. Just one. Places it on the lower railing. Tests the height. The black water waits with a patience that feels almost kind. No more fighting. No more failing. No more watching Emma's eyes fill with tears when Aria cannot afford the medication the doctor prescribed. Her phone buzzes. Unknown number. Text message: Rose's Diner. Booth 7. Now. She does not know why she goes. Maybe because the alternative is stepping off this bridge. Maybe because some part of her still believes in reasons to stay. Her hands are shaking so badly she almost drops the phone twice as she walks to the corner and flags a cab she cannot afford. Rose's Diner sits on the corner of Pike and Boylston like it has sat there for 30 years without changing anything except the grease accumulation in the air. The checkered floor is black and white, worn smooth by thousands of footsteps. Red vinyl booths split and taped. A neon sign in the window buzzes like something dying and refusing to accept it. The clock above the counter reads 3:22 in the morning. Completely empty except for a tired waitress with grey streaking her blonde hair and two men in black suits sitting near the door. And Aleandro Valenti in booth 7, watching the entrance as if he has been watching it his entire life, waiting for this exact moment. Aria slides into the booth across from him. Her hands are still shaking. She folds them in her lap to hide it. Aleandro pushes a black coffee toward her. The mug is chipped. The coffee smells like burnt grounds and yesterday. He says nothing at first. Just watches her the way a man watches something he owns and intends to keep. Douglas Hale made you an offer, he says finally. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in a voice like thunder rolling across concrete. Aria nods. Her voice comes out smaller than she intends. How did you know? Because I have had you protected since the night Bruno pulled you into that SUV bleeding and half-conscious, and the man who hurt you has been a dead man walking ever since I made that decision. The waitress brings water she did not ask for. Aria drinks it because her throat is dry enough to crack. She sets the glass down carefully and looks at him. Her voice cracks on the question. Then why did you wait? Why let him destroy everything? Aleandro's face is stone-carved from stone, but his eyes are not stone. His eyes are the eyes of a man who has seen things that cannot be unseen. Because I needed to know if you would break. If you would take his offer. If you were like my brother, who chose the easy path and betrayed everyone who loved him. I needed to know if you would choose survival or something harder. Aria's hands ball into fists. She slams her coffee mug down on the table so hard the liquid sloshes across the checkered surface. So this was a test? My sister's medications. My job. My entire life falling apart was you testing me? You have the power to destroy people. You could have destroyed him the night I met you. But instead you let me suffer because you needed to know something about my character. Aleandro does not flinch. Not even a muscle moves in his jaw. Yes. The silence between them stretches like taffy, thick and endless. Then Aria laughs. Bitter. Exhausted. A sound like breaking glass. And? Did I pass your test? Aleandro signals to Bruno with a single finger. Bruno places a tablet on the table in front of her. Live security footage. A penthouse apartment at the Pinnacle Tower. Douglas Hale in an Italian silk shirt being dragged across imported marble by 12 men in black suits, his hands clawing at anything solid. His mouth wide open screaming. Eyes bulging like something is trying to escape from inside his skull. Both hands frantically grabbing at door frames, at furniture, at the air itself. The veins on his neck distend against his skin as he begs. Please. Please, I have money. I have names. I have? His words cut off as they throw him into an unmarked van. His hand reaches out one final time. Fingers grasping. Then the door slams shut and the footage cuts to black. Aleandro's voice is soft, which makes it worse. At this moment, Douglas Hale is in the custody of the Corsetti family. They have been looking for the man who trafficked their cousin's daughter into Vancouver. Her name was Lucia. She was 19 years old. They will never find his body, Aria. He will simply cease to exist. Meanwhile, across Seattle in the ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel, 200 people in evening gowns and tuxedos turn as 12 FBI agents in blue windbreakers walk through the crystal doors. Victoria Ashford stands near the orchestra, a flute of champagne in one hand and her husband's arm in the other. She is 42 but looks 30, which is what $200,000 a year in skincare can accomplish. Her Valentino gown is silver, cut low in the front, her hair professionally styled in waves that catch the chandelier light. She is in the middle of a laugh, her mouth open, her teeth gleaming. The lead agent steps forward. He is tall, broad. He carries a microphone that echoes against the vaulted ceiling. "Victoria Marie Ashford," he says. His voice fills the room like water filling a glass. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, wire fraud, racketeering, and money laundering." Her champagne flute slips from her fingers. It shatters against the marble floor. Her laugh stops mid-breath and transforms into something else. Her mouth falls open. Her hands fly upward as if she is surrendering to something invisible. The agents move toward her. Click! Click! Handcuffs lock around her wrists. Her silk gown snags as they pull her backward. Photographers rush the ballroom doors, and cameras flash like lightning. Questions overlap into noise. Her lawyer pushes toward her, shouting something about her rights, but his voice drowns in the chaos. Senator Richard Ashford steps backward. His face goes pale. He shakes his head, and Aria hears his voice from somewhere in the crowd. "I knew nothing about this." Nothing. But no one believes him. The Seattle Times publishes the story at midnight. Federal prosecutors reveal Victoria Ashford financed Douglas Hale's trafficking network through charitable foundations. For $0.7 million laundered over 6 years. 40 victims identified. 40 women and girls found. All of them given the same choice Aria was given, and all of them finally given something else: rescue. Victoria Ashford's bail is denied. Her assets frozen. Her social standing destroyed in the time it takes for a photograph to go viral. 40 years. Federal prison. No parole. No second chances. No possibility that one day she will walk out and reclaim her life. Back at Rose's diner, Aria watches the news footage on Aleandro's tablet. The image of Victoria being led from the ballroom, mascara running, hands shaking so hard the handcuffs rattle, photographers shouting questions, her lawyer failing to shield her face. Aria looks up at him. Her voice comes out as a whisper. "You did this for me." Aleandro corrects her. His voice is low and dangerous and absolute. "I did this because no one destroys what is mine." The possessiveness in those words should terrify her. Instead, something in her chest ignites. Catches fire. Burns bright enough to light the darkness she has been living in for 8 years. And in that moment, sitting in a neon-lit diner at 3:24 in the morning with a man who had just saved her life by destroying 2 people completely, Aria Morgan understands something she never understood before. She is no longer nobody. She reaches across the table and takes his hand. His palm is warm. His fingers close around hers like a promise made in blood. Outside the diner window, the October night begins to thin toward dawn. 3 months later, spring arrives in Seattle with cherry blossoms along the waterfront and late sunlight that turns the Sound gold. The Foundation for Invisible Heroes occupies the top floor of a glass building in Pioneer Square, and when you walk through the doors, you see color-coded grant applications stacked on mahogany desks, photographs of families who received medical funding pinned to cork boards, and in the corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, Aria Morgan sits in a tailored navy suit reviewing scholarship paperwork. She is not the same woman who ate leftover meal trays and counted pennies for gas. Her nails are clean. Her hair falls in waves past her shoulders. The exhaustion that lived behind her eyes has finally retreated, replaced by something sharper, steadier, like a blade that has been honed to its true edge. On her desk sits a framed photograph of Emma blowing out birthday candles, her lungs strong enough now to fill a room with breath. Aria's salary is $87,000 annually. She accepted this position not because she needed Aleandro's money anymore, though Emma's double lung transplant was fully covered by the Foundation's resources, but because she wanted to build something that matters. Something that saves people like her. The afternoon light catches the coffee cup on her desk, steam still rising from it, untouched. She has been staring at an application from a single mother in Tacoma, someone with 3 children and a medical bill that reads like a death sentence, $247,000. Aria knows the mathematics of desperation like she knows her own heartbeat. She approves the application without hesitation. 700 families this year. 700 lives bent back toward hope. But what she does not know, as she sits in this office with her color-coded files and her steady hands, is that Aleandro has been planning something for weeks. Bruno and Sal have been making phone calls. A cemetery plot has been tended. And on a Thursday night in late April, Aleandro asks her to meet him at a place he has never taken her before. The cemetery gates stand open, iron and ancient, and the sun is sliding toward the horizon in shades of amber and rust. Rows of marble headstones stretch across manicured lawns like soldiers in a war that ended long ago. The smell of cut grass mingles with something else, something like earth and quiet and the particular loneliness that only graves can hold. Aria's heels click against the stone pathway as she walks, her navy suit out of place among the dead, until she finds him sitting in his wheelchair facing a single headstone marked Marco Valenti 1989 to 2023. Aleandro does not turn when she approaches. She stands beside him, the evening shadows falling across his face, and she can see the muscle tightening in his jaw. My brother sold our family to the Corsetti clan for $200,000 and a promise of protection, he says, his voice not wavering, each word a stone dropped into still water. He thought I would forgive him because we shared blood. Because blood is supposed to mean something in this world. I drowned him in the sound myself and watched until the bubbles stopped. The silence that follows is absolute. A wind moves through the cemetery, rattling the leaves of a nearby oak, and Aria does not step away. She does not gasp. She does not flinch. Instead, she asks a question that changes everything between them. Do you regret it? Aleandro looks at her then, really looks at her, and in his storm-grey eyes she sees the complexity of a man who has lived in 2 worlds at once, the man who ordered his own brother's death and the man who sat beside a wounded woman in a diner at 3 in the morning and decided to save her life instead of taking it. Every day, he says. And never. Aria kneels beside his wheelchair so they are eye level, the marble around them bearing witness to generations of grief. Her hands rest on his knees. When she speaks, her voice comes out steady as stone. You saved my sister's life. You destroyed the people who tried to destroy me. You gave me a life I never imagined I could have. I know what you are. I know what you have done. I know about your brother, about every choice you made that led you into darkness. And I am choosing you anyway. Aleandro's hand reaches for her face, hesitates halfway, the fingers trembling in a way that no amount of power can prevent. Aria takes his hand herself, takes it in both of hers, places it against her cheek. His skin is warm. His calluses are familiar now. He has not touched another person with gentleness since the accident that paralyzed him 4 years ago, since the day his fiancée walked out of the hospital room and walked out of his life, saying the words that carved themselves into his heart like a blade, I did not sign up to be a caretaker. His thumb brushes her jaw. I was left at my own wedding, he says, and the words come out like a confession, like a prayer, like something that has been burning in his chest since the moment she stumbled into his black SUV bleeding and half-conscious. My fiancée walked out when the doctors told her I would never walk again. She said she could not do this. Every person I trusted left after that except Bruno and Sal. Then you walked into my life covered in blood and refused to break, and I have not been able to stop watching you since that October night. I have not been able to stop building this life around the possibility that you might stay. Aria's response comes out as barely a whisper, but in the cemetery stillness it carries the weight of a vow. I am not going anywhere. They sit in the cemetery until the sun sets completely and the groundskeeper begins locking the gates, and for the first time since his brother's betrayal, Aleandro Valenti believes that maybe mercy is not just a luxury for the living. Maybe mercy is something you can choose even after you have already chosen violence. Maybe redemption looks like a woman kneeling beside you in the dark, her hand in yours, refusing to leave. 1 year later, Emma Morgan, age 18 with lungs strong enough to sing in church choirs and run without breathlessness, sits in the front row wearing a pale blue dress. White chairs are arranged on green grass overlooking Puget Sound, and cherry blossoms fall like snow as 200 guests take their seats in uneasy truce, Evergreen Care Home residents next to men in black suits, Marcello's staff next to lieutenants who have buried enemies in unmarked graves. The afternoon light turns the water gold. Aria walks toward the altar wearing a simple white dress, and tucked into her bouquet, nearly invisible, is her grandmother's recipe book with notes in the margins, the book that kept her alive when nothing else could. Aleandro waits in his wheelchair dressed in a charcoal suit, Bruno and Sal standing as groomsmen, their faces showing the shock they have carried since the night their boss first sat beside a woman without walls between them. When Aria reaches him, she does not hesitate. She kneels so they are eye level for the vows, and the crowd shifts with the weight of what this gesture means: equality, choice, a woman who stands beside him as his equal rather than above or below. The officiant pronounces them married and the crowd erupts, even the men from the underworld clapping with genuine wonder, because they have learned something about their boss that they did not know before: he can be saved. At Rose's diner, now renovated but still holding its sacred 3 a.m. silence, Aria and Aleandro sit in booth 7. Checkered floors gleam beneath their feet. Red vinyl booths line the windows. The neon lights have been replaced, but the essence of the place remains untouched, the same diner where he spoke truth at 3:24 in the morning and where she chose him knowing exactly what he was. A gold plaque on the booth reads, "Where it began." Guests filter through to congratulate them, and Aria notices Aleandro watching Emma dance with Sal, who has become her overprotective shadow, her uncle in everything but blood. She asks what he is thinking. "That night on the highway, you had $5 in your pocket and no reason to trust anyone," he says, his voice like thunder, like venom, like something ancient and certain. "You could have stayed in your car and frozen to death. But you stumbled into the road anyway. That choice changed both our lives." Aria leans her head on his shoulder, the diner lights glowing around them like stars in a confined sky. "You gave me everything," she says. Aleandro corrects her, the way he always does, the way that reminds her he sees her more clearly than anyone ever has. "You saved my mother. My daughter. You built a foundation that helps hundreds of families now. You stand beside me as an equal. You gave me a reason to believe in something other than power, and that is the rarest gift anyone could give me." He kisses her forehead as the diner fills with laughter and music. Aria looks directly into the moment, into the future, and delivers the truth she has learned through blood and breaking and rebuilding herself from ash. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The diner lights glow around them, Seattle skyline visible through the window, cherry blossoms still falling outside like they will fall forever. Two people who should have never found each other sit in a booth marked by a golden plaque, and the silence that surrounds them is not empty. It is full. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will change how you see the world. Drop a comment telling us what you would do if you were Aria, standing at that crossroads between safety and truth. We read every single one of your comments. Every word matters to us. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next story.